Post it.
2, 1. We're live.
Great. Can you post the intro in the chat?
Yes, I can.
All right, let's do it.
All right. How are you doing today, Dave?
I'm doing well. We are excited to have Brad join us today. We've had lots of great guests as we've kicked off this podcast, and it's fun to get started. It's fun to launch in, and I'm extra excited as we just keep getting better at it, and we keep finding our way. So,
absolutely.
Welcome to the Business Velocity through the Five Facets of Business podcast, where your journey to accelerated success begins. We're your hosts, Dave Newell and Hannah Panuski, where in each episode, we dive deep into the five facets of business through conversations with business leaders. Whether you're a startup or a seasoned business leader, understanding how to harness these facets can transform your operations and propel your growth. With our guests, we explore actionable insights and share stories of real businesses that have achieved remarkable results. Let's unlock the potential for your business together and achieve business velocity. Hannah, who do we have on the show today?
We have Brad Johnson. Brad actually is working with us these days, which is super awesome. I'm going to bring him in here. Hello, Brad.
Hello. How are you today?
We're doing good. Brad spent 8 years in the biotech space, starting in the laboratory before transitioning to domestic and international work in technical support, distributor management, and market development. And in 2003, Brad Johnson was diagnosed with stage 4 head and neck cancer at the age of 27. After achieving remission in 2004, he focused on supporting cancer survivors and fundraising for cancer research while building knowledge and expertise in health, wellness, and human performance. He then jumped into being an entrepreneur and a coach. As a business leader and as a community builder, he has been instrumental in the launch of several companies, including one company based in Quebec that I'd love for him to talk about because that was super interesting. I didn't know about that before. He continues his passion for supporting the cancer community, which has driven him into directing initiatives aimed at raising awareness of the importance of funding cancer research and developing stronger support networks for cancer survivors. Brad, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
It is my pleasure. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for jumping in. I mean, we feel blessed that we've had the chance to get to know you over the last, 6 months to a year, that we have the opportunity to partner with you. And you have such a varied and interesting background. I'd love to even just, how do you go from, biotech, deep science research type work into coaching? I mean, how does that transition even take place? And
So
what are the parallels?
What are the parallels? So I think that's it, right? My career, if you want to even call it that, my path,
There you go.
It is linear if you look at it in the right light.
Okay.
So the path to coaching, I didn't realize I was coaching until later in life. Like coaching, the principles of coaching have been a part of how I've operated as a professional really since my first job as a laboratory technician, believe it or not. Just the way that we approach things as coaches, the way we listen, the way we look to discover, and then going into technical service and even sales. I like to say I never sold anything to anyone. I just sat there and listened to them and felt their challenges. And Dave, we have common language around this. I'll use yours. Experience their pain points, and then okay, well, let's resolve some of those, and here's how we can do it. So that was early on in my career, and then becoming an entrepreneur. I very much looked at in a similar light, particularly managing employees. I did not look at them as I didn't want my employees to just wait and what does Brad tell me to do? It's like, no, I want you to be empowered and comfortable and confident in going out there with the information and the power that we've given you through the security of what we're building and the shared vision and the clear path of executing on that vision, to go out there and make your own decisions. And then we can talk about them afterwards. So.
Well, I love that you brought coaching into organizations, right? I heard this the other day that, management in some ways is dying, and coaching is really being born in organizations. I don't know if it's as drastic as death and life, or as it is more of a kind of waxing and waning, so to speak. But I think there's a lot of truth to how we show up with people as a coach, and there's lots of different variations of coaching, right? Like I know one of the variations of coaching for you has been performance coaching with folks who are doing, kind of extreme Ironmans to engage in health. And you've also kind of mentioned, coaching teams. And there's different forms, different variations, different approaches, different practices, principles likely the same. But I'm curious if you can kind of talk about, how to navigate those different spaces, or what a coach is looking for, or what a coach is examining when they're in those different spaces.
Yeah, I think that's critical to understand the type of coaching that's needed in different situations. Right?
Mhm.
I don't believe it's about the coach. It's about the type of coaching that they can provide. And coaches can provide multiple types of coaching. What makes them a good coach is their ability to apply the principles of coaching to the specific individual, organization, team, whatever it might be.
Mhm.
My first official role as a coach was in endurance sports. After the cancer thing, I found endurance sports as a way to rebuild myself, both physically and mentally, psychologically. And
Yeah.
then that was the wake up call to, like, wait, like this stuff I'm learning about coaching in this arena, it's the same approach that I'm taking in other areas of my life. And then, okay, performance coaching, performance psychology is this big circle, so to speak, and like sports psychology is a small piece of it. Operational performance psychology, like it's all the same principles, as you said. It's just our ability to apply them in different situations. And yeah, people break it down, right? There's different scales. You can see, like, here's teaching, here's mentoring, here's consulting, or maybe I have consulting and mentoring backwards. I can't remember. I don't think it really matters, right? As long as you know what you're doing and where you are in terms of the needs of the person or group sitting across the table from you, right? And then, coaching is kind of on the far end. Therapy's in there somewhere, like probably even beyond coaching as far as really just sitting and listening. So yeah. I believe as a coach, it's my job to come with as many tools in my toolbox so that, and I'll use this language, and I do not believe by any stretch of the imagination that I can coach anyone, that I should coach everyone, or that, every coach, and, it's like, not every coach is right for every client. Not every client is right for every coach. Foundationally, that's the foundation of what I'm about to say. But like, I like to think that I come with enough tools in my toolbox that whatever the needs are for that group, that person, that I have the tools, and then I also have the knowledge and the skill to apply them correctly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. What was it? I'd be curious for you. Like, what was it about coaching that specifically that you felt made a lot of sense for, like, how you were already working? Like, was it sort of being able to connect the dots for someone else, or was it being able to, like, plot out growth and progress? Like, I'd be curious to know, like, if you could pinpoint, like, what was the thing about coaching that just really resonated for you when you started doing it, and maybe now too.
Selfishly, internally, for me, it's amazing to witness someone or achieving progress, or achieving certain goals that maybe they didn't think they were able to achieve, and just witnessing that, right? And that is, it's a gift, right? I look at coaching someone as a gift that they give me, to be able to see that. Some of the things that made the connection is I tend to always try, maybe actually later in life, I probably struggle with it more than I used to, but listen first. I want to understand.
Mhm.
I want to know why you're doing what you're doing. And as an entrepreneur and as a manager early on in my career, is because I want to tap into that,
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
I want to figure out like how you function so that we can maximize that in what you do. And the belief there is that you're going to enjoy your work more too and be more engaged with what we're doing as a company. So I don't know if I've clearly answered that, but it all just kind of made sense. And I mentioned endurance coaching and how does that translate into, like executive coaching or whatever you want to talk to. It's like, okay, well, I started working and attracting a lot of high performing individuals, meaning people who are at or striving to achieve, peak success in their career. And it just sort of naturally happened that like what we were doing on the endurance side of things, they were like, oh yeah, I was like, to use just basic language, I was at work and I found that like the same things applied and I could use what I had learned in this 6-hour training to, in this scenario. And it's like, okay, yeah, like, okay, we started to jump over into that. And it all just kind of started to make sense to me or
Mhm.
for me. Yeah.
Mhm.
What are some of the principles that you see? Like, what are some of the translatable things between, what you dubbed as kind of high performance, both in the work environment, but also in, endurance coaching? I would imagine, I mean, I could guess. I think there's a few things that would come to my mind, but I would imagine you've got some specifics. I'd be curious if you have kind of a specific translation.
So the first things that comes to my mind is I believe the highest performers in both those areas are always looking for what they don't know,
Mm.
always looking for growth, always looking for learning, always looking to, okay, is that a ceiling? Is that really a ceiling? Or is that a perception of a ceiling?
Mhm.
And it's less about, this, I mean, grit is a thing, right? That I
Yeah.
do believe is necessary. And, Angela Duckworth and her, you have talent times effort equals skills and skills times effort equals achievement. Like that's definitely there. But, yeah, that's just this idea that I can always be doing more and achieving more,
Mm.
I think is probably foundational. I mean, there's a lot of crossovers with like principles of mindset or,
Yeah.
mindfulness, right? Like coming into everything as a learning experience, something new. I've never been here before. I've had this meeting every month for the last 2 years, but I haven't been in this meeting before. Kind of taking that approach to things, I think, is a key to, not predetermining outcomes and actually opening yourself up for the potential for new
Mm.
levels of achievement.
You just said not predetermining outcomes. I'd be curious because when I think of high performers, I think vision is one of the things I think about. You also talked about kind of a beginner's mind, like how do high performers juxtapose vision and beginner's mind? I'm sure it's nuanced. I'm sure there's different ways to do it.
Right. From a goal setting perspective, yeah, that vision is important. Like, where are we headed? Why am I doing the things that I'm doing today?
Mhm.
But then focusing on the things that I'm doing today. Right.
Yeah.
And, that ties into, I think, with, when we set firm dates, like I'll use a marathon example. Right? I want to qualify for the Boston Marathon in the next 2 years.
Yeah.
Sure. Let's go see if that's possible. Right.
Yeah.
It's a great goal, but that 2 years is it's arbitrary, really, when you think
It's
of it.
yeah. Yeah.
Right. So there's a vision there, but the vision, maybe we'll just put the 2 years kind of outside of like, let's define what the vision actually is. And then each training day is a new training day. Tracking progress. It's all about progress, not about, perfection. I
Mhm.
can't think of who I just heard say that. But and then understanding that every marathon you do, you could run. I trained with a coach who, while we were training together, coaching together, ran his 50th marathon. And I can tell you, it was in Alaska.
Hmm.
And at the end, and he was trying to qualify for Boston.
Yep.
In the end, he said, "I've never run a marathon like that."
Right.
So, every marathon's different, right? So like that whole, yeah, I've run a lot of this and done a lot of this, but each one's a new experience and a new opportunity to learn and apply going forward. That's all, right? And tie that back into coaching. All we're trying to do is learn and apply forward, learn and apply forward, learn and apply forward towards that vision.
Yeah. How do you handle it when somebody's not applying forward? I mean, I've had a few coaching experiences where, maybe it's my own fault as a coach, but 3, 4, 5, or maybe it wasn't the right fit, but 3, 4, 5 conversations down the line, you're not seeing the progress, you're not seeing the movement, you're not seeing the commitment to the action. Like, how do you actually activate behavior change in folks that may be resistant or hiding?
So a few things come to mind.
For a friend, Brad, I'm asking for a friend.
I'm a very patient person, and I'm very comfortable with silence and sitting where we are. And so I can wait and give people space to spin in circles. Now, that being said, as a coach, I think it's our responsibility to always be the leader in that relationship. And so to your other point, maybe it wasn't the right fit. Like, okay, well, at some point, wait, is this in the best interest for the client? Like some people do just need to spend time doing nothing, right? Yeah. Some people need to kind of get there and be given space to do that. And people also need to be free to be human beings, in my opinion, too. Like, okay, yeah, we set out to do that and it didn't happen. It's okay to be sad. Yeah. It's okay to feel like not wanting to do it again. Or why did I put all that effort in just to quote unquote fail? Right? It's okay to have those thoughts and feelings.
Yeah.
How do we come out of that and move forward? I do think that also brings up kind of the delicate balance between a coach, active listening, reflecting back, asking the right questions. But sometimes that question is like, hey, listening to you talk, this thing occurred for me and maybe it would be helpful. Would it be okay if I shared it with you? And open the door to also give a little bit of a
nudge.
A little bit of a nudge every once in a while, because I think that's part of coaching too.
Yeah. What do you do when you come up against resistance? And I don't know necessarily that because I would imagine a lot of your clients come to you for the coaching part of it. So maybe, I'm sure there is resistance in the coaching too, but maybe even more so when you're in daily life. I know I experience this where like it's a friend, it's a family member where like I see the potential, but they just have such resistance to challenging themselves to the next step. I'd be curious to know, like, how do you handle that kind of resistance?
I can't remember when it was early on in, one of my first, I don't know, courses or whatever, like never coach your friends or your family.
Yeah. Right.
But, a lot of the same techniques can be used in your relationships there. Resistance is often looking, to me, they're still looking back. They're not actually looking, or maybe not even in the present. A gentle way to do that is just help point out the things that are around them in a nice way. At the end of the day, it has to come from them. So, if your techniques and your own, kind of approach to getting people through that isn't working, then, some people aren't ready for coaching. I'll say, some people aren't open to it, which is fine. I don't mean that in a judgmental way, but coaching isn't for everyone.
Sure. Oh yeah, totally. Well, and I'm curious too about your background in science, the overlap of science and coaching. Like, how do those two things play into each other? And if you want to talk about more about like I know you mentioned like the science of coaching and how it works.
So I think overall that's useful to some people. and not useful to other people. It's useful to me as both a coach and someone who is a coachee. I like to know why things work. That's just in my nature. But I also recognize that not everyone is like that. So, when I'm coaching with someone, I might be thinking in my head, like, oh, this is what we're doing,
Yeah.
If that's not interesting to them, then it's not interesting to them. But I like that. And I like to talk about that in a way that's for people who care about it and people that don't care about it. Because I do think that coaching, maybe this is shifting and has been shifting over the last 20 years, that like outside of certain settings like sports, it's sort of like, oh, well, I hired a coach. How does that work? I don't really know, and so I think it does help, I think, coaching in general, for people to know that there's actually science behind it, like not just psychology, which people have their own experience of, but there's also physiology behind it. Like there's actually things changing inside. Your physiology is adapting to what we're doing. And, that takes a lot of time. And by a lot of time, I mean, it doesn't typically happen in a session or two, which is why I believe that, I request that we agree to 4 months of coaching, 3 to 4 months, because that's typically how long it takes for the physiological adaptation to occur. So, again, but some people don't care about that, but just the idea that coaching isn't just this thing that like people make up. We sit down, I'm just going to make up what it is that we're doing. Like there's a foundation to what we're doing.
Yeah.
Helpful for some.
Well, I mean, to your point, right? Like data can teach us something. And if we're coming in with a beginner's mind, if we're not actually tracking progress, I mean, one of the things that I think about is having been coached and stewarded several times by mentors and peers, but also actual coaches. One of the things I appreciate is when you can identify the gains and you can see the gaps, right? If you think about, well, when I started, this is how I was thinking, or this is the way I was talking about something, or this is how many times I was doing this activity. And now I'm saying no 3 times a week instead of saying yes 100 times a week. I'm saying 97. It's like, okay, well, that's better for me, right? Like I'm now saying no 3 times, and I'm building data, and I'm building the other side of the story, right? Like I in our coaching, we think a lot about what's the story that they're telling themselves, what's the narrative that's happening, how are we at least opening the door to the fact that the other story might also be true. And in order for that story to be true, there needs to be data. So I do think tracking some variation of progress, whether they like it or not, is kind of part of the deal in my mind.
I agree.
Oh, yeah.
Vision and goals come into play, because if you don't have those, what are you even tracking towards?
Right.
Yeah. And it's so absolutely. And it's so easy to just be like, well, what's really changed? But then if you have some sort of like reflection given to you, like a data tracker of how things have changed, we throw things out of our mind if they aren't instantly impressive. But if you can like mark slow changes in some kind of visual way that reminds you, oh yeah, 3 months ago, I used to only, and this is an easy example, oversimplified example, but 3 months ago, I used to only be able to do 5 push-ups. Now I can do 40, something like that. Like, even if it's some kind of reflection on like, well, no, I can't do 100, but I can do 40 now when I used to only do 5. It's so important to have some kind of tracker like that, because I mean, I would also imagine too, and this, I'm speaking from my own personal experience, as someone who's very goal oriented, it is easy for me to be more obsessed with the things I haven't accomplished than to reflect on the ones that I have. And so like having some kind of tracker to remind you, like, this is what you've accomplished. Let's honor that as you continue to work toward the next thing is so huge. That's what gives balance, I feel.
We stack our successes. That's what actually moves us forward, right? So if you have someone who's not able to recognize success or doesn't recognize success, then they never feel like they're right. So I think that's part of coaching too. Is like, okay, yeah, we still got a ways to go, but like let's take a moment and look at the successes that we've achieved. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious to know, because I a lot of my work has been with startups and small businesses too, but so coaching people in startups or consulting with startups, what are some specifics about working with that world and those kind of folks in that, startup mentality that you find really fascinating, and maybe some things that you would recommend for anybody listening who works at a startup?
That's a big question. It's a really big question.
I know it's very broad. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. So, I've done some consulting with startups. That's very different, right? Where they bring me in to like, we need to have a division that actually extracts the products that we're growing and need to sell or something, right? And so that's very linear. One of the things that comes to mind when I think about startups is the importance of having a plan, but the importance of being flexible, right? It's sort of like that 2-year goal. It's like, great, that's a 3-year business plan. When you take step 1, are you still going in that direction? Right? Like, I think it's important again to have that vision, but the map from New York to San Francisco has a ton of different roads on it.
Yeah.
And so, being true to your vision, being true to your business plan, to me is different than, oh, we can't do that. That's not in the business plan. And so I think a certain percent of startups, and I guess most of my experience is small and medium size, fail because they aren't flexible enough, that they aren't reading the signs and being adaptive to their environment and what they're discovering as they're moving down through their process. So, we talked about goal setting a few times, right? SMART goals, right? They don't include this key thing that, like, yeah, you set that goal and you have all those characteristics, which are great characteristics of a goal, but there's also this constant evaluation, because there's a certain amount of goal setting that is just like throwing a dart. So I guess did that answer the question specifically enough?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a similar vein, you were talking about like a beginner's mind. We were talking about data. We're talking about goal setting and kind of the weave together. It was Dewey who said, we don't learn by doing, we learn by thinking about what we do. The caveat is, if you're not doing anything, you don't have a whole lot to think about. But, to be able to say, we've said this multiple times with clients as we do, kind of long-term planning or strategic planning. We do a lot of strategic planning with organizations. And what I've started to say is, like, if the pandemic and what we've experienced over the last few years has taught us anything, it's like we have no idea what 3 years from now looks like. We just don't. It's impossible for us to predict what 3 years from now looks like. We can guess. We can get close. We have good thinking. We have informed choices that we can make. We have informed ideas that we can make. But if we are not kind of consistently looking at, evaluating, modifying, changing, and adapting what our thinking is, then we're missing the mark, right? So to your point, like, I think SMART goals are great in the near term. I think they can be destructive at 3 years. I think they can be limiting. So, I mean, I love that. I love that kind of weaving in the beginner's mind and to be able to pay attention. I'd love to maybe just pivot a little tiny bit, right?
Okay.
Say, you mentioned being coached, and I'm going to ask a personal question, which is, what is the discovery for you in being coached? What's something you've learned about yourself that you thought, oh man, I don't know if I would have known that had I not been coached?
So I'm going to reference something back to a project that I was involved in that had a number of shareholders, and I was right. I'm going to point that out. Right?
I was like, is that what you learned from coaching? Is that you were right? I was like, I want your coach. Yeah.
Right. The agreement said what they said. We were operating in a way that we were operating that was completely in alignment with the agreements. Everyone had the agreements. Some people didn't think that we were operating in the way of the agreements. They received the agreements. I was right. I did nothing wrong. Right. That led to avoidable conflict. Right. In the moment, I didn't think anything. I was like, no, I'm right. Operating in terms of the agreements. It took a really, really good coach to have me see that, you know what? Yeah, that's fine. You were right. Look where it got you. Right. Are you a nice person? Well, yeah, I think I'm a pretty nice, loving, compassionate person. Do those things align?
Mm.
Huh. Okay. This is a really significant milestone in both my journey as a coach, although I was not fully involved in coaching at that time. I was still very focused on my entrepreneurial life or whatever. But you know, that to me is that's coaching, right? Like, she didn't teach me anything new about operating my business, but she taught me something very, very powerful that I've tried to apply going forward about how I am as not just a leader, but as a person, as a partner to be in business with, as a human being, right? And so that the other thing that comes to mind is, like, you know, when I got my first coaching certification, which, by the way, we could have a whole conversation on what I think about coaching certifications. But and my wife said, "Great, you don't need to pay a coach anymore." And I was like, "Well, no, that doesn't like." I think part of being a coach is seeing the value in coaching and recognizing when, hey, I could use a coach right now. You know?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, I think at any point in time, you know, I'm fond of saying that, you know, when Michael Phelps, when it was in his prime, right, like he was winning 18 gold medals, 23 gold medals, I think he finally got to, he had 6 coaches, and they were looking at different aspects, right? Like, I'm sure there was performance, I'm sure there was mindset, I'm sure there was like, here's how you use your legs appropriately. And somebody was talking about arms. Like, I mean, I'm sure it was like so specific to particular things, you know, to your point that you said earlier, like there's coaching for different things, and there is alignment in who you get coached by. But I would also argue that, you know, we might look for a coach who thinks like us, who, you know, is nice to us, who makes us feel good about ourselves, and it can feel like puppies and kittens and cotton candy when we talk to them. But really, I think the best coaches are the ones that can hold a line and challenge you and force you to deal with and grapple with some of the things that you're not dealing with and grappling with, right? It's not just accountability. It's also the ability to see, you know, to have foresight, right? To see, like, I can see the potential in you. I can see this thing. Like, I can see where you can go as a person, and this thing and this thing and this thing are in the way. How do I get you to deal with it? Not because, you know, I'm forcing you to deal with something you don't want to deal with, but because if I get you to deal with it, I get you to grapple with it, I can unlock something for you that's going to make your life richer, better, you know, and more autonomous.
I think that's exactly that's the point I was just trying to make with that story. Right. I don't want a coach to tell me a bunch of things I already know.
Yeah.
Like, I want a coach. I wanted her to tell me, like, yeah, you're right. So what? You know, let's go where you don't want to go, because that's where growth is gonna occur. So
yeah. No, I love that. I think that's maybe what my takeaway was from, you know, when I mean, I have been coached by many people over the last few years, it feels like, but I had this one particular coach last year who I feel like got me to do that exact thing too. Like, you need to go exactly to where you aren't comfortable and lean in more, and that's where your growth is going to happen. And she helped me realize just how capable I was of handling ambiguity, because I do not think that I naturally am good at that. But that's because I shied away from it because I was uncomfortable with it. But that's what they're here for, is to encourage us to lean in that direction. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so we're nearing the end of our time together, and so you mentioned Quebec. You're not originally from Canada, if I remember correctly. Did you learn French?
Oui, je parle français un petit peu. I learned French to the point that I needed to. I moved up there at 29, an ignorant American, thinking like the whole world speaks. And I had traveled extensively in biotech, and everywhere you went, they came over to my side on the English, right?
Yeah.
Quebec is French. Right? And you can end up in places where nobody speaks English very easily, and I think it's funny to think about that because it's right there, right?
Yeah.
So I've given a couple presentations in French. I'm very glad they weren't recorded. My daughter, who kindergarten, first, second, and third, maybe even fourth grade, I'd have to think. She's bilingual. She will not permit me to speak French in her presence.
Because she's better at it.
It's like nails on the chalkboard for her.
That's funny.
What I learned, and this applies to this conversation, is that I didn't have to be perfect. I just had to be putting in the effort. And they appreciated that so much that most of the time they would say, it's okay. We'll speak English. Whereas if I had come in there like, hey, I don't speak French.
Yeah.
It would have been a different outcome. So.
Yeah. I do have one more question for you though. I'm sorry, I this came up in my mind earlier, but we were talking about something else. Didn't seem like the right time to ask it. But so I would imagine a typical question, on a podcast like this about coaching, like how do you get into coaching? Sure. But I actually be more interested from you, and Dave, from you as well. Let's say coaches are listening to this episode and are wondering how they can grow. Because I imagine if you coach for a couple of years, kind of can feel like you get a little stagnant. Maybe you're helping your clients grow, but how does the coach actually grow themselves? What would that look like from your perspective, having done it now for several years?
Do I go first since I'm the guest, or?
I think so.
Okay. I mean, it's a boring answer, but I catch myself when I feel that way. I look back and I was like, okay, well, I'm not reading, I'm not digesting new material, I'm not out there engaging with other coaches. I think that's extremely important. Working with a coach is one thing. I don't do it all the time, but I do try to recognize the need for a coach in my own career. So it's a constant process. If I'm being hired, at least for the length of an agreement, to be constantly assisting in the client realizing forward momentum, I also have to be creating forward momentum in myself as a coach. It's a responsibility, and you got it from a business perspective. To me, like you got 40 hours a week, whatever, like how many of those are just about becoming a better coach?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I will say, having done leadership development, C-suite coaching, consulting, I mean, there are definitely days where I don't just feel like a hypocrite. I am one. Right, where I'm asking you to do something that I'm not facing myself, or I'm encouraging you. I know it's the right thing to do, but I'm not pushing myself or challenging myself in the way I should be. And those days are low days for me, generally speaking, when it feels like, oh man, I'm not doing the work I'm asking you to do. Right. And I think that's a difficult thing to swallow. But at the same time, I think it's a good indicator that it's like, oh yeah, I also need to be doing the work, and I need to be leaning in, so for the coaches out there, for people who are exploring coaching or trying to grow their coaching practice, in many ways it is like, yeah, you also need to be putting in the work, and you need to be ascribing to the things that you're putting forward. And there's millions of coaches at this point in time. I feel like so many people in the last few years, and I have so many conversations with people who are, second, third, fourth career, or as you put it, can you call it a career? Maybe it's a path at this point in time, where they've gotten into coaching and they're entering what feels like a saturated space. And one of the things that I really appreciated through our conversation, Brad, is, you haven't really, said like, well, coaching is a cookie cutter thing, because it isn't. It's personal. it's intentional, it's thoughtful, it's connected. Like you got to find the right person for you. And I think where, coaches can find their niche, so to speak, is being uniquely themselves and finding people who appreciate that, connect with that, and resonate with that, but also need that. Like they need your uniqueness and vice versa, right? Like it would be very easy for me to go find a coach who sounds like me, talks like me, looks like me, and that would feel good, but it wouldn't be as effective, right? And so knowing, all right, what are my unique things that I can bring to a coaching environment, and how can I attract the right people? So knowing who it's for and who it's not for is a really important question to understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Brad. We obviously look forward to working with you as we're going to continue to do. But yeah, any other questions or anything left unsaid before we say goodbye?
This has been a blast.
Good.
And yeah, I'm looking forward to the adventure that we're on as well. So,
well, in the spirit of our other interviews, we should probably ask, like, what's the thing that's just burning for you right now? Like, what's something you want to know? How can people find you? But also, what's something that's got you fired up?
So as far as finding me, probably the best way is LinkedIn, although my LinkedIn page is in the process of being updated. I don't actually have my handle memorized, but Brad Johnson, Charleston, South Carolina. Yeah, I think it's in there somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Just ignore the in process profile that's happening there. And no, what's burning for me personally, or just like in the world around me, or open question?
Just something that's like you're stewing on, you're thinking about a lot. That's just got like it's consuming your brain a little bit.
So, in my bio, it came up that I had a late stage cancer when I was 27, clinical trial patient, like came through that, very iffy at times. I'm disturbed as a human being, cancer survivor, and quite frankly, as a coach whose job it is to serve others, at the lack of consistency and availability to services for survivors. And I group survivors, anyone who's survived an experience of cancer, whether it's themselves or they've survived someone else going through cancer, because it impacts that way.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, when we talk about, like, yes, I'm passionate about coaching, I'm passionate about my family, and I'm passionate about that. Like that's burning up at like, okay, I've been around for 20 years because of this clinical trial I went through. I've learned a lot as a survivor. I feel a calling there, and that's really, yeah, it's a fire. It's a fire right now to figure that out.
I think that's fantastic, and I can't wait to see what you create with that fire, because I would agree. I think that's a huge need. Yeah,
absolutely,
for sure.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Brad. We appreciate you joining us, and as Hannah said, we really look forward to working with you and partnering with you more over the coming weeks, months, and years.
Ditto.
Thanks, Brad.
All right. Thanks, Brad.
All right.
I cut him off there for a second. I'm sorry, Brad. He's great. He has such a lovely, like, easy way about him.
Yeah, I mean, I do appreciate, like, he is a good coach, not just in part because he has the skills and the experience, but just because of who he is and how he shows up and the level of commitment and care and patience that he puts into it. I think, I've known Brad, I don't know, probably 6-ish months, I would say. And when we talk, it's evident that he is like morally led and has fire. And so I think it's, he comes across as a patient, quiet, thoughtful person who's got fire. And it's like, I think that's such a great balance. I think it's such a powerful balance to be around. So I've seen firsthand his ability to impact people and affect change and lead well. And so it was fun to hear some of the insights that he shared. One of the piece that really came out, I've heard this term 1,000 times, but just that beginner's mind, like, how am I learning in every environment? Yes, I've been in this staff meeting, 50 times, but this is the first time I've been in this staff meeting. And I really liked that question, right? I really like that frame. And it was a good reminder for me, at least, to be mindful as I walk into spaces, not just going from one thing to the next thing and thinking about, well, I got to get through this meeting so I can get to the next meeting, right? Which candidly is sometimes how I think about meetings. But just to be like, this is the first time I've been in this meeting.
Mm-hmm.
That was a good reminder for me. That was definitely something that is stirring in my brain, and I'm sitting with quite a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. No,
What
I
did
love
you
that.
take away, Hannah?
Oh, I mean, so much. I have always been a big fan of like mentorship. I don't think that I really knew until the last like 2 years, like truly the effect that coaching can have. And I'll be honest, like the value of it, because sometimes coaching can be expensive, but
Yeah.
it is such a powerful investment. And especially when you invest it in someone like Brad or like yourself, who is a good coach. Like they are a good listener. They know how to really push you to do the things that you want to do in life. I do, oh gosh, I see the value of it more than ever. But I think I really love what he said, which is like, it's about finding the right one for you. Like you really do need to do your research and see, like, does this person have the background in the things either that I want to achieve, or have they helped someone else achieve them? Often they can have testimonials and things on their website, or you can get, referrals and things like that. But I think it really matters to do your research on a coach that you're thinking about working with, to see if they really are the right fit, and the right, investment. Because everybody just has their strengths. They have, different things they bring to the table. So, yeah.
I totally agree. I think that's really important. I mean, it's not like hiring a plumber or an electrician, right? Like that is certified, they have the skills, but they're performing a technical thing.
Mhm.
Coaching is intimate and personal, and that person has to see you and care and want to be a part of that journey with you in a different way.
Mhm.
Sometimes they're a fit and sometimes they're not. So I think that's really true, and I really appreciate that. Well, great. Well, thanks so much for the conversation today. Thanks for poking in. We hope you learned some nuance about coaching and how to pick a coach and why it matters. And we hope you got to experience Brad in a great way, and that you connect with Brad. I mean, he's an amazing coach, a great person, and yeah, we're excited to be working with him.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If you're curious, please go check out our website, theevolveddifference.com, and you can check out some of what we're working on with Brad, as well as 5F, the letter F, accelerators.com. Check out some of the new products that we have, and we'll leave that in the show notes as well. But thank you for joining us on Business Velocity. Today's insights are just the beginning of enhancing your business's momentum. Don't forget to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts for more episodes that will help turn your potential into performance. You can, like I said, check out the 5 Facets of Business at theevolveddifference.com. And remember, the time is now to take these strategies, apply your learning, and achieve velocity. We'll see you next time.